Hello, everybody at Jeju Xinhua World. Bangap Samida. My name is Dr. Paul Larkham, and thank you for allowing me to present at the prestigious 11th International Conference on Convergence Technology. Today I'll be presenting findings from a study conducted by myself and Professor Ju. The title of today's presentation and study is Exploring Students' Performances in and Attitudes Towards a Task-Based Language Assessment. The contents of today's presentation will be a brief introduction, the procedure process, findings, and finally a conclusion. So the introduction, this study was inspired by the 10 years that I spent teaching English in Korea between 2010 and 2020 through conversations with Professor Ju, and that's what ended in this study. So if you look on the PPT slide, so the introduction here, interests in task-based language assessments we'll refer to as TBLA is not a new phenomenon, but research in TBLA is relatively insufficient. In TBLA, students' language is elicited by the task itself and not by the teacher, and students should actively participate in using language for the purpose of completing the task. And the tasks in TBLA should be strongly associated with and or placed in specific situations, be goal-orientated, and require the active participation of the language performers. McNamara and Norris et al. Have expressed concerns with using TBLA as a means of generalizing students' LT performances. However, for all the shortcomings of TBLA, it is pertinent to recognize the benefits TBLA can provide English education's practitioners. If students have been taught by task-based language teaching, it's believed that they should also be tested by TBLA, but it seems that TBLA is not usually implemented in the classroom. Classroom teachers at present do not have sufficient knowledge of information about TBLA. Thus, the current study here aims to investigate if TBLA is effective for students and to aid in the understanding of the potential of TBLA in L2 education through comparisons with non-task-based language assessments, which we'll refer to here as NTBLA. Non-task-based language assessments, in this case, this study, was the more traditional topic-based assessment where students talk in groups about their holidays or their hobbies, etc. The research questions for this study are as follows. The two key questions are: number one, are there any differences in students' performances between TBLA and NTBLA? And two, are there any differences in students' attitudes towards the two types of tests? So if we move on to the procedure that was used for this study, the data was collected from the performance of 52 university students that I was teaching at the time. Students' English ability ranged from a low-level speaking ability to upper intermediate proficiency. All 52 students were required to be tested in a TBLA and once in a non-task-based language assessment, NTBLA. After taking the 2 tests, they completed the questionnaire about the attitudes towards the tests. The procedure of the TBLA was designed to elicit oral production, which included the tasks of brainstorming a tourist guide brochure. The second task, a task of working as a group to make the tourist guide brochure. And the third, deciding the style of the tourist guide brochure. The NTBLA was more traditional, as I just mentioned earlier, designed to request the students to talk and discuss the 5 different topics that were covered in the previous weeks in classroom. If you look at the screen now, we can see some of the key findings that were discovered during this study. The findings, the questionnaires were analysed with SPSS 19.0, t-tests, chi-square tests, correlations and descriptive statistics were conducted to see if there are any meaningful differences in the students' performances and responses to the questions about the 2 types of tests. The test performance, as we can see on the screen in table 1, the paired sample t-tests were conducted here to investigate if there are any differences in the students' performances between TBLA and NTBLA. Correlation analysis was carried out to see if there were any relationship between the performances in the 2 tests. The significance revealed that students performed better in pronunciation and fluency in TBLA, as you can see on the screen here. However, all of them were strongly correlated. That is, the students who performed well on TBLA also performed similarly well on NTBLA and vice versa. The students' attitudes towards the test. Students' attitudes. Students did not show statistically many significant differences in their choices between the 2 types of tests, TBLA and NTBLA, as you can see in the PPT slide. However, their choices indicated that they had a slightly more positive attitude towards NTBLA according to the results of the statistical description. In addition, they also thought that TBLA was slightly significantly less fair and more difficult than NTBLA. The table on the screen here shows highlights most of the students, 87% liked being tested in a group, and also 93.5% found no problems in taking the tests, and 91.1% no difficulties in completing the tests that were given as part of this study. So, in conclusion, what we found, particularly that TBLA did show improvements in students' performance levels in some areas of L2 production, and we believe that this reinforces the continued need to further investigate the usefulness of TBLA in testing in L2 education, it should be emphasised that this study is not attempting to persuade researchers and educators to only use TBLA, but to encourage testing to include TBLA when appropriate and match the test instruments and procedures that best suit the assessment purposes of the courses being conducted. It can be concluded that TBLA may be more appropriate for more small-scale courses in the classroom, either at schools or universities. When using these environments, teachers are typically more able to gain more accurate inferences about what the students can achieve using their L2 knowledge. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoy your wonderful stay at the beautiful island of Jeju.